Vasudeva returned to the prison under the veil of night, carrying Nanda's newborn daughter. As he entered the cold, dimly lit cell, the gates of the prison closed behind him with a soft click, locking themselves as though nothing had happened. The guards remained in their deep slumber, unaware of the divine exchange that had taken place. Vasudeva gently laid the baby girl beside Devaki, who was still unconscious from the exhaustion of childbirth. After some time, Devaki stirred, slowly waking from her unconscious state. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw the infant girl lying next to her. A wave of confusion washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a deep fear. She understood at once that this child was a girl, her daughter. Panic gripped her heart, knowing that Kamsa would come for the child, believing it to be the 8th child foretold by the prophecy. In despair, she clutched the baby tightly to her chest, tears welling in her eyes as fear consumed her. The child's cries soon echoed through the silent dungeon, awakening the guards. Hearing the baby's wails, they rushed to inform Kamsa. Startled from his deep, unnatural sleep, Kamsa's fear flared within him. He grabbed his sword without hesitation and stormed toward the prison, convinced that the prophecy was unfolding before his eyes. When Kamsa reached the prison cell, he found Devaki huddled in the corner, cradling the infant girl close to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. The sight of her brother entering the cell with a sword in hand sent waves of panic through her. Tears streamed down her face as she begged for mercy, her voice trembling with sorrow. Every fiber of her being begged for mercy, knowing the futility of it. She pleaded with Kamsa, hoping that the sight of a helpless baby girl might stir some sliver of compassion within him. She reminded him that this was no son, no threat to his life, just a newborn daughter. A woman could never pose a danger to a warrior as powerful as Kamsa. Her heart ached as she recalled the 6 sons he had already slain, their innocent lives cruelly taken in his madness. The memory of the 7th, lost in miscarriage, only deepened her sorrow. She wondered what honor could there be in killing a defenseless infant, especially a girl. But as she held the child tighter, praying for even a trace of humanity in Kamsa, she knew that her hopes were fragile against the stone-cold certainty of his fear. Her pleas, filled with grief and desperation, echoed through the prison. But Kamsa, consumed by fear and blinded by his obsession with survival, remained unmoved. The sight of the infant girl did not soften his heart. Without a word, he reached forward and tore the child from Devaki's arms. Devaki cried out in despair, her heart breaking as she saw Kamsa hold the child high in the air. With cold determination, Kamsa tossed the infant upward, intending to slice her with his sword midair. But as the child ascended, something miraculous occurred. The baby did not fall back into Kamsa's hands. Instead, she transformed in midair, her body radiating divine light. In an instant, the newborn girl revealed herself as Yoga Maya, the goddess of illusion. Hovering above Kamsa, she spoke in a voice that resonated with unearthly power. Her voice carried the weight of divine judgment, exposing Kamsa's cruelty. She revealed the horror of his actions. 6 innocent children killed in fear, their heads smashed against the walls of his palace. His terror had driven him to even attempt the murder of this helpless baby girl, blinded by his obsession to escape his fate. But his efforts had been in vain. The child he feared, destined to bring his downfall, was already beyond his reach, safely taken to a place where Kamsa could not harm him. There was no escaping the prophecy. Devaki's 8th son would return, and when he did, Kamsa's death would be inevitable. This information struck Kamsa like a blow, leaving him kneeling in despair. Everything he had done to avoid this moment had been for nothing. His fear and wickedness had not saved him, but had only brought him closer to the doom he had tried so desperately to avoid. With those words, Yogamaya's radiant form vanished into the ether, leaving Kamsa standing paralyzed in disbelief. His sword slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. He fell to his knees, his heart sinking under the weight of her words. Everything he had done, the countless murders, the ruthless actions, had been in vain. His mind spiraled into despair, realizing that despite his efforts, the prophecy would come true. The child destined to kill him was alive, somewhere beyond his grasp, and his death was inevitable. Devaki, too, was overwhelmed by the revelation. For years, her heart had been burdened with unspeakable grief, weighed down by the loss of her children and the fear of endless suffering. But now, with Yogamaya's words, that weight was lifted. A profound sense of relief washed over her, and a spark of joy flickered within her heart. Her eighth son, the child she and Vasudeva had waited for, was alive, and his destiny was to bring an end to Kamsa's tyranny. In that moment, Devaki and Vasudeva felt a surge of hope unlike any they had known in years. The future they had longed for, the one in which their son would fulfill the prophecy and free them from their imprisonment, now seemed within reach. Though they remained confined within the walls of the prison, their spirits soared with newfound faith. They knew with certainty that the day would come when their son would return to Mathura, confront Kamsa, and restore righteousness to the land. For the first time in years, Devaki and Vasudeva dared to dream of freedom, knowing that the divine plan was already in motion, and that nothing, not even Kamsa's fear, could stop what was destined to unfold. On the 10th day after Vrikodara's birth, Kunti took him to a tranquil waterfall to bathe, while Madri stayed behind, tending to Yudhishthira. As Kunti submerged herself in the cool flowing waters, Madri carefully looked after both children. Once Kunti returned, it was Madri's turn to bathe. But before leaving, Madri warned Kunti in a low, anxious voice that they should leave the area soon, as she had heard the roar of a wild animal, likely a tiger. Fear crept into Kunti's heart, as the thought of lurking danger unsettled her. After Madri finished her bath, she carried Yudhishthira in her arms while Kunti cradled Vrikodara close. As they walked cautiously through the forest, their thoughts clouded by the earlier warning, a sudden roar shattered the stillness. From the mouth of a hidden cave, a massive tiger leapt out, its golden eyes burning with fury. The beast's roar echoed through the hills, striking terror into their hearts. Kunti, startled by the sheer size and ferocity of the tiger, let out a terrified scream. In her panic, she lost her grip on Vrikodara, and the infant slipped from her arms. Helplessly, she watched in horror as her son tumbled down a steep slope, disappearing into the depths below. Madri, paralyzed with shock, instinctively clutched Yudhishthira closer to her chest and ran as fast as her feet could carry her, leaving Kunti behind with the approaching predator. Kunti, overwhelmed with fear, recovered from her shock and immediately began to run down the slope toward Vrikodara. Her only thought was to reach her fallen son, but her frantic movements triggered the tiger's predatory instincts, and it gave chase, roaring as it pursued her down the hill. The beast's powerful strides brought it dangerously close to Kunti, its claws ready to tear into her. Nearby, Pandu heard Kunti's terrified scream cutting through the forest. Instantly alert, he grabbed his bow and a quiver of arrows and raced toward the direction of the cries. As he reached the scene, he saw the tiger charging at Kunti, just a heartbeat away from leaping upon her. In one swift motion, Pandu drew his bow and loosed 3 arrows with precise force. The arrows struck the tiger mid-leap, and the mighty beast crashed to the ground, writhing and roaring in pain. Kunti, breathless and shaken, stood frozen as Pandu rushed toward her. Her heart still pounding, she managed to tell him that Vrikodara had slipped from her grasp and fallen down the hill. Hearing this, Pandu's heart sank. The thought of his infant son plummeting from such a height filled him with dread. He feared the worst, that his powerful second son had perished upon impact, leaving Yudhishthira alone once more. A deep sadness settled over him, and he braced himself for the possibility of finding Vrikodara lifeless on the rocky ground below. With heavy hearts, Pandu and Kunti began their search for the fallen infant, scrambling down the hill. Their minds raced with fear, but they pressed on, determined to find him. As they reached the base of the hill, what they saw left them both stunned. There, beside a shattered boulder, lay Vrikodara. The massive rock, strong and solid, was broken into countless pieces, as if it had been struck by a powerful force. And there, amidst the debris, lay Vrikodara, his tiny form untouched, his face aglow with a pleasant smile, as though nothing in the world could trouble him. For a moment, Kunti and Pandu stood in disbelief, trying to comprehend what their eyes were witnessing. The infant they thought had perished in the fall was not only alive but unharmed, his serene expression undisturbed by the ordeal. The very rock that had broken beneath his fall lay in fragments around him, as if his tiny body carried a force far beyond human comprehension. Kunti's heart overflowed with joy. Relief washed over her, erasing the fear and guilt that had gripped her moments before. She knelt beside her son, cradling him with tears of happiness in her eyes. Pandu, too, felt a sadness dissolve into pride. His heart swelled with admiration for the incredible power his young son possessed. Even as a mere infant, Vrikodara had displayed a strength that defied all logic. Strength worthy of a warrior destined for greatness. At that moment, both parents realized that Vrikodara was no ordinary child. His strength was a gift, a sign of the divine favor that rested upon him. With hearts full of gratitude and pride, Kunti and Pandu embraced their son, knowing that this powerful boy would one day grow to become an unstoppable force, a protector not only of his family, but of the Kuru lineage and beyond.